Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is Jessica Squirrel, and in this video I'll be showing you how I made this underwater card for the current Lawn Fanatics challenge. To start, I have a 5x7 piece of paper. I have made a mask using Inkadinkadoo's stamping mask paper. I've cut out a mask that will mask off my bottom portion of the paper. That will be my sand. The top part will be my water. I then ink blend the water using Distress Oxide colors in Tumbled Glass, Mermaid Lagoon, and Peacock Feathers. I keep it darker towards the bottom and lighter towards the top. You can stop here after the two colors if you want. I added in the Peacock Feathers just to add some color variation to the water. When ink blending, I tend to go lightest to darkest and then back through my colors back to lightest to blend them out. This is the same way I tend to use Copic markers. Once I'm satisfied with the way the water looks, I'll remove the bottom mask and then add the top mask over the water. This is going to prevent the sand color from getting into the water. It takes me a few tries usually to get the mask exactly where I want it. I don't line it up completely to the edge. I usually leave a little bit of blue showing. That way I don't have to color in any gaps later. For my sand, I'm using Distress Oxide ink Antique Linen. I start blending from the top down. It'll give the very back of the sand a little bit of a darker look. I then take my ink pad and smush it onto a plastic lid. Sometimes I use a stamp block, but I gave my oldest son most of my stamp blocks, so I couldn't find any. I just used what I found, and that is a lid to my finger daubers. Anyway, once you smush the ink pad, you then add water and you splatter the background with your watered down ink. This will just give it some texture and make it look more sand-like. Next, I'm going to take my Distress Oxide ink color in Brushed Corduroy, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Something to note with any ink like this, or even watercolors, is that they dry back. So while you're making the splatters, they look very dark, or darker than they normally will. They will lighten up as they dry. Another thing with Distress Oxides is that when they dry, they have a chalky finish, as you can sort of see in the masking paper that I just pulled off. To add texture to the water part of my panel, I just spray it with clear water. I block off the bottom part with a scrap sheet of paper. For the images that I'm going to use today, I am going to use a couple of the mer people from Mermaid for You from Lawn Fawn. For my coloring, I am going to be using alcohol markers. So for this, you need an alcohol-friendly ink, and the one I am currently using is from Simon Says Stamp. The first color combination I'm using will be E31, E35, and E57. This will be for my mermaid skin. I start by laying down the lightest color. I then find my shadows with the midtone. I deepen my shadows with the darkest color, and then I go back through with the colors to blend them out. Some color combinations take a lot more work to blend, and this is definitely one of them. You will see as I am coloring this mermaid, I color over her several times with the lightest skin tone to try to blend out the colors a little bit better. The same is true for the boy's skin tone, but I think his was just a little bit easier to blend. I'm now going to give her some blush. She has darker skin, so I use R32 for her cheeks. With the lighter skin tones, I tend to use R30. Moving on to the boy's skin, I use E30, E31, and E55. I color his skin the exact same way I colored the mermaid skin. If you look closely, you'll see that shadow that I'm making right there looks very weird, and this is why I do the mid-tone as my shadows to start with. That way I can kind of blend it back out with the lightest color if I do not like the choices that I made where I placed the shadows the first time. For the mermaid's tail and her top, I'm going to do a rainbow ombre. For the top, it is Y00 and RV00. The tail is RV00, BV000, B00, and G00. I did later try to go back in with darker versions of each of those colors to add a shadow, but in the end, you can't really see it after the ink dries. Here's where I'm attempting to make shadows on her shirt and tail, but it doesn't really turn out, so you can just pretty much ignore this part. I do end up using each of these darker colors later for the little fish in my claw machine, but it doesn't really work here. I actually think at the final card that my merman has more of a shaded tail than she does, and I only used the exact same colors that I color the rest of his tail for the shadows. And those colors are B02 and G02. Next, I'm going to color the merman's hair. I decided to give him blue hair. The colors I used were B12, B14, and B16. When coloring in hair, I like to do little flicks of the marker. I tend to start with my lightest color and sort of map out where I want the darker areas to be, because I do tend to get a little bit too heavy-handed with my dark colors and I lose a lot of the highlight. So after I've made the shadows or the darkest areas of the hair with the lightest color, I go in with the mid-tone, and I usually keep it about to the ends of where I put the light color. I then go in with my darkest color, trying not to go quite as far out. After I've done that, I go back in with my mid-tone, and finally I go in with my lightest color. You can leave white highlights, but my light color was light enough that I felt like white highlights were a little bit too harsh and not necessary. I usually focus the darker colors at the very ends of the hair and then where the part would be. For my mermaid, I used colors RV52, RV55, and RV66. I figured if my merman had blue hair, my mermaid should have pink hair. I do her hair the same as I do the boy's hair. The only difference here is she has hair that would be sort of behind her, and in that case, I do add darker color to that area as well. Back to coloring the hair. When you do color hair, it's important that when you make your little marker strokes that they are not all the same length. It's also important that you sort of flick the marker to make it feathered out on the ends so that it's not blunt looking. This will give the hair a more realistic look, as realistic as bright pink hair on a mermaid can be. Now that I've got my merpeople colored, I am going to stamp out the claw machine from the Lawn Fawn stamp set, Your Clawsome. It has bears on that stamp. I don't want bears to be in the claw machine, so I am going to take my washi tape and I am going to cover up the bear part of the stamp. I am leaving the little tube part in there as much as possible, as I still want that to show in my final image. The first time I ink the stamp up, I actually only ink the top and the bottom portions. Those are areas I really wanted to stamp very well. I avoided the tape. The second time, I stamp over the entire stamp, tape and all. I then remove the tape and I press it down. This didn't give me the cleanest image, so I tried to ink up part of the stamp a little bit more. Ultimately, I ended up having to finish the lines off with a Prisma fine liner pen. This particular one works with Copic colors or alcohol inks, so I didn't have to worry about it bleeding or smudging. Next, I'm going to fill up my claw machine. To do this, I am using a fish from the set Fantastic Friends from Lawn Fawn. To repeatedly stamp the little fish on the inside of the claw machine, I have taken scrap pieces of paper and put them around 3 sides of the claw machine so that when I stamp the little fish, it does not go outside of the machine. I also have taken Post-it notes, stamped the fish on it, and then cut them out to create a mask. I've done this 4 times, and this is enough that I can mask off any areas that I need to stamp additional fish. While stamping these, I kind of go over the whole area randomly. This will just make some fish look like they're at the front, and some fish look like they're at the back. I did need to make the little tube on the inside of the claw machine a little bit longer. I contemplated freehanding this, but I can't make a straight line. So instead, I took a little ruler and finished the line in that way. In the stamp set, Your Clawsome, there is a row of either hearts or stars that you can stamp along the top of the claw machine. I'm going to use the hearts just as a guide. I am stamping them on a scrap sheet of paper. Instead of using either of these for my actual image, I am going to use a little seashell. I thought it fit better with the theme. In order to keep the placement where it should be, because I'm using one stamp instead of a row, I'm going to keep referring back to my template. I'm going to place it in my stamp positioner, place the stamp down, pick the stamp up on the door, ink it back up, stamp it down, do it all over again. After my images have been die cut, I used the same colors that I used on the mermaid for the fish that will go in the claw machine. Those colors are RV00, Y00, BV000, B00, and G000. This die cut fish will go in the claw machine. I wanted it to look like the mermaid. To make this fish stand out even more, I darkened the eyes with my black glaze pen. I didn't clean the tip of it off very well and it kind of smudged on one of the eyes. I'll fix that later. For my yellow fish in the claw machine, I use Y00 and Y02. I wanted the rest of the fish in the claw machine to still match the colors I had used for the fish that's in the claw as well as the mermaid, but I did not want it to be exactly the same. I had wanted the fish in the claw to look unique. For the green fish, I used G000 and BG32. Normally I use 3 color blends, but because nothing else is going to have a ton of shading, I opted out of that and only decided to use 2 colors for each fish. For my blue color fish, I have B00 and B01. For my pink fish, I used RV00 and RV10. For my purple fish, I use BV000 and BV01. To save time, I cut out the footage of me coloring the rest of the fish. They are all the exact same colors. Now I'm going to use BG000, BG11, BG23, and BG49 to color in the background of the claw machine. I used my lightest color to color in the tube to make it look like glass. I then take BG11 and 23 and make a gradient in the background with the lightest color on the top and the darkest color at the bottom. I use my BG49 to draw in seaweed in the background. I wanted this to still look like an ocean, but not the ocean that will be the background behind it. When I think of claw machines, I usually picture them with some kind of printed background in the back of it. So that's what I tried to replicate here. Next, I'm going to use B14, B16, and B18 to color in the main part of my claw machine. This footage is sped up quite a bit. I color this stuff the same way I do most other things, laying down my lightest color, going in with my midtone, followed by the darkest color, and then back through to the lightest color to help blend it out. Now I'm going to make bubbles all over the background of the claw machine using my Jelly Roll white pen in size 10. I also go along the edges of my stamped image where the line might have been a little bit smudged, or I colored it outside the lines a little bit. To color in the legs and the claw of the claw machine and also the control panel, I use Copic Colors C1, C3, and C5 to make them look like metal. I use RV52, RV55, and RV66 to color in the shells and the other details of the claw machine. I chose this color because it's the exact same color as the mermaid's hair, and I wanted to tie that color in somewhere else, while still keeping the claw machine a little bit different from the contents inside. I then decided I wanted to add bubbles on the outside of the claw machine too, just to keep it from being too dark. I randomly added it with the same gel pen that I used for the bubbles on the inside of the claw machine. I also add a couple shine marks to the glass of the claw machine with my white gel pen. I'm now taking a ruler and my X-Acto knife, and I'm going to make a little channel inside the claw machine so that I can slide the claw back and forth. Here I have a scrap piece of paper that I color with the exact same BG marker that I used in the background. My intention was to layer this behind the claw machine when I attached it to the panel so that you would not see the blue of the water behind it. Unfortunately, I forgot it while I was putting my card together. Now I'm trimming my panel down just a little bit smaller than 5 by 7. With my background panel trimmed, I decided to add some little heat embossed fish in the background. I'm using Ranger's white embossing powder for this. Off camera, I stamped and colored a bunch of different images I wanted to add to the background. For my first color combination, it's YG05, YG07, and YG09. For the purple coral, I used BV000, BV01, and BV04. When I looked up pictures of coral, I found that this particular type of coral looks like it has lots of texture, and that's why I colored it with a bunch of dots, especially with the shading. For my pink coral, I used RV21, RV23, and RV25. I was tempted to add dots here, but when I looked up the pictures of the different coral, this one looked like it would be pretty smooth. For my orange coral, I used E95, YR02, and YR07. For this particular one, I only added the darkest color in the way of dots, just to give it some texture. For my first seashell, I used E50 over the whole thing, and then I used E31 to create the detail. For my second seashell, I used E50, E53, and E35. The first two colors I use as the base layer, one of them being the shadows, and then I go in with my E35 and create little dots all over the shells. Next is the rocks, and I use W2, W3, and W5. For my little fish, I use Y000, Y02, B14, and B16. To add interest to both my mermaid and the fish that will be in the claw, I use my Wink of Stella glitter brush pen and go over each of those. I only put it on the mermaid's tail and the mermaid's top. This is me trying to show you how glittery it actually is, but it didn't really capture it very well. I attach my rainbow fish to the claw using some liquid glue. Sorry for the extra noises. My toddler is in my arms and he's making all kinds of noise. I keep trying to record while he's not making noise, but at this point I think he's doing it specifically to be heard in the video. To make it where the claw can slide back and forth, I added 3 layers of foam tape. This next part is pretty useless, the penny part. When I added it, I intended for it to add enough weight so that the slider piece would move back and forth on its own. It didn't work though, so really all you need to do is add just a piece of paper along the back to keep the claw in the track. The next step is to add foam tape along the edges, making sure that you're not blocking the slider. For this, I used double layers of foam tape. I then attach the claw machine to the card base, and I check to make sure that the claw still moves freely. For my mermaid, she will be half on the claw machine and half off. The half of her that is hanging off of the claw machine will be attached with a double layer of foam tape. The other half that's attached directly to the claw machine will be attached with liquid glue. The merman is mostly on the claw machine, so he will be entirely attached with liquid glue. For the seaweed, some will be attached directly to the card base with liquid glue, and some will have teeny tiny little strips of foam adhesive on them. The one behind her is attached with liquid glue. The shell is going to rest over the foot of the claw machine, so it will have foam tape and liquid glue. The same goes for the smaller shell. For this piece of seaweed, you can see that there are tiny little pieces of foam adhesive on the back of it to pop it up. Off camera, I did the same with the second piece of seaweed that is behind the merman. For all of the background coral, rocks, and fish, I used liquid glue and attached them directly to the card base. For the purple coral that's hanging off the edge of the card panel, I trim it off. I usually turn the card panel around so that I'm looking at the back. It just helps me make an even cut. I then heat emboss my sentiment in the corner. I really wasn't sure where I was going to put it until the very end. Once my sentiment was heat set, I took my last little fish and glued it in place. I then took my white gel pen and made little bubbles coming from each fish. I wanted my underwater panel to have a blue border, so I took this 12 by 12 sheet of cardstock and cut a 5 by 7 rectangle from it so that I could mat my underwater panel on it. I just attached it with liquid glue. Here, I use my stamp positioning tool to line up the card base with the card panel. I attach them together with liquid glue. And now my card is complete. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I will be back with another video soon. Thanks for watching!